Hey everyone, it's Joe Glines here. Today I'm talking with Michael Wilson. Actually, it's kind of funny. We had a funny way how we came to this interview was my friend Gabe, who I interviewed, I guess, I don't know, it was about a month ago, maybe a little longer. Um, he actually works with Michael, and they were doing something, and Michael shared something with him. They both happened to use AutoHotkey, and Michael shared something with him. And my friend Gabe happened to see my name, on it, and he's like, "Hey, wait a minute! I've known Joe for 20 years. We've been working together, so it was kind of funny." Michael, why don't you give us a little bit of a background of your background in what you do, and then also how long you've been using AutoHotkey and or programming?
Yeah, so I'm a university researcher at the moment, still also completing my PhD, so in that kind of grey area of university research employment.
Yeah.
So a lot of what I do is human factors psychology, so really looking at psychology in the workplace, so in situations like air traffic control or military settings. But sometimes I sort of describe my job as a glorified data brickie, which is the Australian term for bricklayer, putting together the pieces of the data to form a bigger picture. So I didn't have any formal training in programming, although I've always had a long love of computers, but it was something I sort of picked up over time. So throughout my early PhD, as I started developing an air traffic control simulator for part of my thesis, that sort of got me a bit more into programming and the ways in which we can pull the data out of it and how we can manipulate it. And that's got me into Python.
Oh, cool.
And I'd been using AutoHotkey a long time before that, but not in a very complex fashion, mostly just for, rebinding keys and whatnot. And it wasn't until the later stage of my PhD and now my current employment at Curtin University, where I started working on projects that required a little bit more of a automation component behind it, and that's when it clicked that I could use this tool which had been sitting there in my taskbar doing things for 5, 6, 7 years to suddenly just do all of this all of these tasks for me. So I guess that kind of paints the picture of going from someone that loved computers, not a whole lot of experience, and AutoHotkey was there in the background, through to now where it's become an integral part of almost all my workflows.
And what was your early example of how, like you said, for roughly 5 years, what were you using AutoHotkey for then at the start?
So the very first thing was just rebinding the caps lock key to control, which I don't know why that isn't the default on all keyboards, and it infuriates me. So I decided to make a program. Let's rebind caps lock key to control. Then it became things, simple things like the media keys. Why can't I hold down control and they also skip track, or those kind of little
absolutely
little tasks.
Sure.
So I had a whole bunch of little scripts and tools that I used just to mostly around input. The first major project I would have used AutoHotkey for in thinking about automation was actually filling in my timesheets for work, where every single week would have a timesheet and a PDF, fill in the dates, fill in the times, rah, rah, rah.
Yeah.
And I worked out that I could actually just get the data straight from a CSV and just push a button, and every Thursday it would just automatically go fill in all my hours and submit it off. And a few friends at work saw that and sort of caught on from there, where I started to really realize how powerful AutoHotkey was.
Yeah, I was the same way. I used it for hotkeys like you're describing, and then hot strings for about 3 years. And then I changed jobs, and suddenly I had to do some web scraping and type things, and then it blew my mind, like everything you could do with it. And even then, I probably still just scratched the surface. Right? It's crazy. Like anything you're doing on a Windows computer, right? I mean, you can to some degree automate it. It's awesome.
And I found that because I've actually been historically a large Linux user, so a lot of my computer is done with Linux. But one of the things that keeps Windows as a sane working environment for me is AutoHotkey, because it And it's probably one of the few tools that actually makes me really want to stick with Windows, because, yeah, without it, lots of my entire workflows just wouldn't be able to, work at all.
Yeah, and for me, it's the same. I'd say the same way. It'd be really painful to use Windows if I didn't have AutoHotkey to make it function, both more in the way like the intuitive, like the keyboard binding you were talking about, right? The way I think it should work, which is awesome. I can tweak that, but also just automating a lot of typically what I do, which I think in other now it's much more of a programming experience in other, like let's say for even just switching to Python, right? Python's you're generally not building a GUI to help you do stuff because it's so much more work to do that. So it's a lot of code, and I played with Python too. It's a powerful programming language, but it took me so much longer to do anything than in AutoHotkey that I finally just said, why am I trying to learn Python when I can do it in AutoHotkey, so much faster and easier?
Yeah, I found that AutoHotkey just seems to make complex problems very, very immediately possible, and it's really good for when you're working under tight deadlines. So in research, this isn't an industry where, having the best program or the most robust code is valued. Often it's quite the opposite, where it's get the job done, give us the result as soon as possible, and this thing might go in the recycle bin as soon as you finish. So AutoHotkey is kind of perfect for that environment where you want to quickly, bang out the GUI, get something working, and without having to necessarily perfect every single possible error, and catch every possible error and perfect all the code and whatnot.
So, side note, last weekend I actually went out to Georgia, where actually Gabe and I both went with different programs. So, but I taught a class to the current students that I had graduated from almost 20 years ago, and in that, so my background was in statistics and multivariate analysis and stuff, right? And that's what I did for a lot of the time after I graduated. And I taught them actually a little bit about AutoHotkey and automating stuff and using macros and syntax and SPSS. What I told them was look, the school is teaching you guys how to do regression the quote unquote the right way, right? Look for outliers, do all the stuff, make sure your data, there's 5 main assumptions in regression you need to check every time. And they're like, hey, but you know what? In the real world, you never have time for doing all of that stuff. And so I had automated a lot of my analytics and to put them into macros and made it simpler and quicker, where I could do some of it, but it was like you said, I'm like, it's real world is you never have time for doing all this stuff that you're supposed to do. So that's why I had written macros and stuff to help me do the bigger, things that I wanted to do. But it's interesting is that need for speed, right? And just getting stuff done is so practical. It's so real world yet. And something now, again, what I would say is if I'm helping a business make a decision on a $5 million investment, you're damn straight I'll spend more time, right? And I'll make sure that all the stuff is buttoned up. But typically the things I'm working on are one project here and there, and I just need to get results, in a couple hours, and you don't have time for all of the things that you should be doing. Anyway, I think did you have some examples? I don't know if you can share them, or just we can talk through some of how you use AutoHotkey.
Yeah, so there's one example that I'll share. This wasn't actually the first project I've done with AutoHotkey, and it was one of the early ones. There's multiple iterations of it. I'll see if I can share the screen. Here we go. So in short, it was a very, 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 very simple script. I won't go into all the details of it, but the main point here is that I had basically never written a GUI program ever in my life, and within what was only 50, 100 lines, I got a GUI program. And what it basically did, the purpose of the program, was as researchers working with qualitative data, so when people are filling in diaries, a typical researcher will sit down and they'll go variable 1, variable 2, variable 3, variable 4, and go through these variables. And then what you have is you've got a form view. So you can use a form view in Excel to fill out these, various records. So I was working with a team of people that had to do over 2,000 pages of paper diaries into a Excel spreadsheet. And for the large part, there was a few little tweaks I did with AutoHotkey, so making it so if you push, if you push the numpad 2 in here, which I'll just open up now. So rather than having to go 2 tab, 3 tab, 4 tab to enter in, say, the response to question 2, what I've done is I made a quite simple little script here. I'll just quickly load it up. That now I know you won't be able to see what I'm doing on the keyboard. If I push 2, it automatically jumps to the next item. So that was the first component, which is obviously quite simple, but it's just rebinding a lot of the default functionality. But the thing that drove me absolutely bonkers as the person that was dealing with the data afterwards was date times. So date times are obviously very, very sensitive to slight variations in formatting. And so what I basically have done is I made a nice little script where you just push F9 and you can get this GUI where you can input a start date, time, and whatnot, so a date and a time. You just hit OK, and it will send it as a formatted timestamp into these different cells. Then the researcher can just go on to the next record. And I guess the cool trick in it that's actually working under the hood is that we knew that people were filling in these diaries every 12 or 24 hours. So they weren't just filling them in, whenever they felt like it. So this is actually just jumped 12 hours into the future. So say we made this at 13:30, so they were an hour and a half late on the 14th. Hit enter, new record. Now it's jumped forward the next day to 1 a.m. And so the researcher can sort of have this way of checking that their manual input corresponds to what's in the diary. And that was, again, something conceptually quite simple to do. But when I sat down to try and implement this in Python, I just couldn't for the life of me work out what the best approach to tackle this is. And just quickly make it as well so that what if the researcher clicks on, Facebook Messenger and then comes back here and clicks OK. It's easy, obviously, in AutoHotkey to make sure that it's always finding this window and making sure it's always selecting the right cell. Right. So that was just for date times.
Real quickly though, because for people who haven't played with date times and AutoHotkey, it has amazing built-in functionality for having the calendar, like the calendar and the dates and times and things. It's so awesome you can really easily add those GUIs and be able to dial it up and down or jump around in the calendar looking view and everything. It's really flexible. It's one of the things I loved about it.
Yeah, sorry, I sort of just dodged that there even in the demo. But yeah, what you can see here is this is one line of code in AutoHotkey, so it's not complex at all, and you get a drop-down menu. And I'm a really, really big fan of keyboard shortcuts, so if it doesn't have a shortcut, I don't like using it. But yeah, AutoHotkey, you've got left and right arrow to move around, up and down, and then tab can jump between the various things. So it's useful sometimes when you want an overview of, how many days are there here? I want to start it there. But then, you can still quickly jump in and make those edits.
And you can basically change that format to whatever format you want to. I think you have day, month, year in your structure there.
Yeah, so this is actually a good example where in the code, I've actually made it do it in 3 different formats. So I've done it in the time just in only like an integer, the date just as an integer, and then a formatted UTF formatted timestamp as well. So it made it really easy to get multiple kinds of time simultaneously without that you're having to spend this effort.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Manually putting that in, and that alone saved our entire team, hours upon hours
of just
work.
Painful work, where someone might make a mistake too, right? Where it's ridiculous to have a human doing that when you have that first time, right?
And I mean, there's still quirks. So one of the issues I detected early on was that when you place it into Excel like that, Excel will automatically format it if it thinks it's a date in a certain way. So some of them were changing to PM, but all you have to do is just triple quote the string before you chuck it in. And again, that's so simple to do in AutoHotkey.
Well, I think you could also use COM in Excel and preset the format to however you wanted it to that timestamp, right? So you could control it, and then you wouldn't have to use the triple quotes to say treat it as a string.
Yeah, that was one of the, I guess, limitations of this program, and something I'd like to, if I extended it into the future, is at the moment you can see that it's really dependent upon that Excel form view. And one of the big limitations of that is that you can only have a maximum of 32 variables that you're simultaneously entering in data for.
Mm-hmm.
So for the purpose of our project, I said, you know what, it's fine. Let's just go with this. And all it's actually doing is going in there and pushing tab, going to the next form. But yeah, I have seen on your website, actually, some of the ways you can link in the COM objects with Excel.
Yeah,
and I think that would be, ideally the future direction of.
Well, because the other question I'm just curious is there a particular reason why you're even using Excel? Is it that you want it in an Excel file that you then need to submit, or what?
Yeah, so I would have actually preferred just to have it in a plain CSV and have the thing send it straight there. But the other researchers in my team were familiar with the Excel environment, and they liked being able to open it and then be able to just quickly inspect it and go through and add in comments. And it's this kind of familiar, it adds a familiar environment for them rather than giving them a complete black box of a program that they aren't quite sure how it works. So when there's actually two versions of this program. So when I was doing the data entry, it was just going straight to a CSV from AutoHotkey. But for their side, it had this sort of leveraging on top of the form view. But one thing I liked about just that little program is that it leverages functionality that is already there in Windows, but you're mutating it into what you really want it to do. So whether that's changing keys or being able to more quickly just placing the data in the format that you want, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can kind of build upon what's there and extend it. So I can also show you another component to the GUI that's slightly more complex, if you like.
Sure. Yeah. The other thing, just a food for thought, is you could have done everything in AutoHotkey for that data entry, and then have it just create the Excel file without actually manually updating it line by line, right? So it's still in their format. Because I honestly, I completely agree. I'll do that a lot where Excel makes it easy for other people to digest and to get, and you can keep the format and the structure, and it's pretty if you want it to. But you could still do all your data entry just in AutoHotkey, in a form, and then just have it dump it into Excel for you, instead of cell by cell, right?
Yeah. One thing I really like to have as well is a way in AutoHotkey to visualize the actual data as a table. So, then you could remove Excel entirely from the pipeline.
Yeah, list views are amazing in AutoHotkey, and as long as you don't have tens of thousands of rows, it handles it no problem. They're super easy to build and to use.
Yeah, I've got one more that's in a pretty similar vein, but a little bit more complex. That kind of shows the extent of what happens, I guess, when you push AutoHotkey under high pressure environment to the limit. But this was a little bit more of a complex GUI. So I'll just quickly, am I still sharing the screen?
No, I don't believe so.
Perfect. So we'll just delete what's here. So the other thing was, it wasn't just that they had to fill in survey items, but as I mentioned, we had this kind of diary or event log of what these participants were doing throughout their day. So cooking, cleaning, eating, whatever it was. So I think we can just load in this one. So you can enter in a subject ID, and basically what you get is, again, familiar start time picker, but what you're doing here is instead saying a duration of an activity. So let's say the activity went for 60 minutes. And what I really loved about this is that our researchers, we knew the activities were only at a 60 to normally on the granularity of about an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours. So people didn't really say that they were cooking for 5 minutes and then yes.
Yeah.
So I found control 1, 2, 3, 4 to increase the duration.
Yeah.
Or control plus and minus to add 15-minute increments.
Yeah.
Add in page in the diary. Then you can use keyboard shortcuts like Control O to go to other, Control R to go to rest. And it's got autocomplete for the kind of activity that they were doing. And of course, as you add in an activity, that will now come onto your recents list.
So that's a combo box, right?
Yes, that's a combo box.
Yeah, those are awesome.
And I used I think it's called CB autocomplete. I've just found it on GitHub, and that's what enables this autocomplete here. And again, it's obviously not the most efficient way of doing it, but it just sends it to an Excel spreadsheet with the format required. And then when you push it the next time, it's automatically added the duration of the previous activity, so you never have any missing data. And then so you can go in again and say socializing this time, and jumps in. So again, it's obviously quite a simple program, but we were under really, really tight deadline, and I had no clue really when I started this how I'd go about building a GUI, and it was just through a bit of Googling and stumbling across AutoHotkey that it sort of occurred to me that I can actually construct the very thing that they can put the data into and save us all a hell of a lot of time.
And focusing exactly, you only put in the stuff they need, right? So it's intuitive because you're designing it exactly that, but it's also not all this other information where in another program it's easy to get lost, right? You just controlled, this is all you need to manipulate right here. And so that's awesome.
And one thing that made it really good as well is I'm sure people familiar with AutoHotkey would know is that you can compile it directly to an exe. So when I had Python scripts, often it was a bit more difficult to get it working on someone else's computer.
Sure.
So you can compile them to exe, but I often found that I got some bugs associated with that. As with AutoHotkey, straight to an exe, and now my entire team can just be running this simultaneously. If a bug pops up, just replace the exe on Dropbox, everyone opens a new one, continue. So yeah, that was, I guess, in terms of data entry, that was my first major moment where it kind of hit me and really started to fall in love with this kind of crazy but very manipulable, and I don't quite know the word to describe it, but it's this, AutoHotkey can really mold and shape to solve any problem that you throw at it, more or less.
Amen. Yeah, and this is why also I like having these interviews, right? Because that was a great example of just how you adapt. You created something that you someone else may not even realize like they had that need, right? That like, oh, you know what? I can simplify this data entry. Instead of entering it actually into Excel, I can create this little snippet here that I can manipulate and really, like, if you had demonstrated actual usage, right, when you start burning through it, you can enter data like crazy, right? So much faster once you get used to that flow. And it's amazing.
because when I joined that team, everyone was doing it manually, and I sat down just to load the data into R. First time I tried to pass any of it, countless errors, things in different formats, and when I showed my team this, they, completely mind-blowing how quickly we could now start getting through. 2,000 pages only took us, a bit over a week and a half rather than what could have been months.
Yeah. What years ago, what I would have done is I would have created a survey, right? Basically that would have had those just those input boxes alone. And then what I loved about that was I could control to say, in Excel, it was really hard to lock down and say, don't let people type in a word here. This should be a number. This has to be one of these numbers. And so in a survey form, it allowed me to actually control for that. And it also automatically dumped it all into a database for me. And so like at Six Flags, I was a director of research, and my admin, or not our admin, would email out to the 26 parks every week the spreadsheet and say, hey, update the spreadsheet for us and get us back so we can do our numbers. And the stuff they would return was just crazy, like the things they'd put in there, and she'd have to spend hours and hours like fixing what they did. And I'm like, why don't we just put it in a form, and we can control, and we can give them spots to write in when they want to explain something, but just force them to write a number here, and that's all. Anyway, it's the same overall process, right? It's just you're making it where you can literally, you're designing the program instead of being restricted. Like in my survey form, I had to do certain things a certain way, but this allows you to control everything. And that controlling of having a hotkey to focus where you are, you can burn through data entry so fast. That's awesome.
And the other thing I should mention there is, the most complex bit, and I think the most interesting part, is actually being able to build that GUI in AutoHotkey and be able to have those procedures and layers. Where it sends the data to is almost the easy bit, because, in this case, just sending to Excel. I have my own one that just sends it straight to a CSV file or JSON. But where it chooses to spit it out to is almost the easy part. But the other bit is often the complex component, but it is made a lot more simple thanks to AutoHotkey.
Yeah, and actually you'll appreciate this because you probably went through the same exact thing. Was when I first started using AutoHotkey, and not first, but when my first GUI, I tried making a GUI, and I'm like, oh man, AutoHotkey is amazing, but GUI's like, okay, it's confusing. They screwed that part up, whatever. So I didn't do stuff. And then I tried it in Python. I was trying to make GUIs, and actually I was attending these Python meetups where there'd be like 60 guys, right? Oh, all right, and one girl. And I would ask them like, hey, I'm trying to make GUIs in Python, and like, oh, I don't make GUIs. So like, oh, it's and it took me a while to realize AutoHotkey didn't screw up GUIs. GUIs are just they're different, right? They're not linear. They're much different way of thinking and implementing. And so then I realized, actually, after I played with a little more, AutoHotkey, their GUIs are amazing, right? The controls that are built into them. That was the other thing that drove me nuts in Python. Like, no matter what I did, they're like, oh, you got to go get that library, and you got to go get that library, and you got to go get that library. And then there's different versions of the library depending on what version of Python, and it was really confusing.
It just astounds me as well, the stuff that just comes by default in the AutoHotkey GUI framework. So just as an example, when I had those date times come up, you saw that it was at each step, it was iterating the date time. So it was pushing it forward, so 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. So there's actually just a really one little argument that you place at the end that sets the default time of your date picker. And it seems trivial, but when you go to try and implement that, I originally started in a C# or PowerShell date picker, and it wasn't really the same. You had to.
Oh man, yeah.
So many working parts and different libraries just to try and set a default value that iterates as every time you push F9 key. So those defaults you can't really go wrong with it. Yeah,
awesome. Actually, I'm curious. Do you use any hot strings?
So this is an interesting one because I love the concept of hot strings.
Yeah.
And I find them intuitively appealing, this idea that I can quickly just enter something in. But The only time I actually use hot strings is for actually writing AutoHotkey applications themselves.
Yeah, that's fine.
So
Yeah.
I have ones for like sleep of a certain duration,
Yeah.
or I've got ones that are like I can move my mouse to a certain location, push say F3, and then when I type in various hot strings, it can either click on that. So it'd be like L1 might left click on the coordinate that I previously pushed F1 on, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Or I could, I might do like click and coordinate and then bottom coordinate. So I've got a bunch of hot strings, but only for making AutoHotkey applications, which is a little bit meta, but I found them very, very.
And so I'm curious. In SPSS, are you using syntax or do you use GUI?
So yeah, I don't use heaps of SPSS anymore as I've slowly moved to R, but everything I do is all in syntax.
Yeah, okay.
And yeah, that is definitely, if I sat down to start writing out things a lot again like that, I would be using hot strings.
Yeah.
Although I do use a few hot strings in R for just simple things like you're running a comparison between two conditions.
Uh-huh.
I know that there's like a set of procedures that I want to do. So I want to save it to a variable. These are the two things. Then I want to compare it to something else. And then I want to do a summary and then view it. Just type in a hot string and then just quickly move between the different components.
Yeah, and that's what I did for years with where I was using AutoHotkey mostly with SPSS in automating my programs and pulling up my calls to macros that I had written, and it saved me so much time. But yeah, I especially like it's that binding of things together that like in SPSS they're completely separate, and yet every time I do this, I want it to do these three things, and so that's where it comes in really handy. Even then, though, I'm like I have so many hot strings for just selecting data for aggregating whatever, and I'm like, why am I trying to write this out by hand, right? So it just streamlined the process. But yeah, I understand if you're not doing it day to day. That's the problem with hot strings also, right? Is you got to remember the hot string to do it. And so for that, you got to be using them enough. And that was where when Gabe was actually out here at his last visit, I introduced him to the quick access pop-up, and that allows you to easily make a GUI to add your it doesn't have to be a hot string, but add a snippet of code that has a lot of other stuff. But your snippets you can dump in there, and then you have a GUI to say, oh, I want this one. And it'll dump in your snippet of code, which is the text you want. And that when I'm like, oh man, I wish I had known about that tool quite a while ago, because the GUIs, when you don't use it a lot, the GUIs are super helpful to, not have to remember the hot string.
They're very, very, so there's obviously simple hot strings, which I had used quite a bit actually in like linguistics when I was studying that. So for phonetic alphabet related symbols, you could just quickly do the hot string. And in fact, I still use it for symbols like the Chi alpha Greek alphabet. Yeah. So I have the hot strings for all of them. Sure. But I often just load that selectively when I know I'm about to write a whole bunch of them. But you can also use them hot strings in because obviously a hot string can also be to a function. So
sure. You can trigger something.
So you can even do things like, I'm not sure if you write much in Markdown.
No, I don't. I understand. I know.
You can copy and paste HTML text, and then you can send that in the back end through to Pandoc, and then return it as Markdown, and you could set that as a hot string. So you can copy and paste something, and then go colon to Markdown and then you get your conversion just done automatically, quickly, right on the fly.
Cool. Yeah, I actually wanted to borrow something similar to that, because and I need to do it today for our webinar for next week. I post an alert or I should say I make a post on Reddit, on several Facebook pages, on LinkedIn, and then there's the AutoHotkey forum, and the Reddit and AutoHotkey forum, and then those and the LinkedIn, Facebook all use a different format in how you actually, put your stuff there. And so I've made it I have a template that I can search and replace the name and the title, and the format's there, but I should have what you're talking about is like I write one the way I want it and then hit a button and it goes and creates the different post for me in that formatting, I guess is the best way to describe that. Unfortunately, not Markdown. It's each one is like their own little kind of offset version of, of it's not HTML, it's not Markdown, it's their custom, formatting.
Yeah, and the other thing is that's great is you can always have sub-processes. So you can always, even if you can't do it all within AutoHotkey, you can always just call the sub-process and pull it in.
Yes, right. Like actually that OCR one, Tesseract is an actual program that you download and have locally, but then so I use the screen clipping to get the text, and then I send it to that program, and then I can get it, the results of it and put it on the clipboard for me. But I'm not actually doing the OCR with AutoHotkey, right? I'm just sending it to that program, and then I never even see it, right? But yeah.
Yeah, I find that I've actually recently, most of what I do with AutoHotkey is often actually as a sub-process to a Python script. So this is probably the biggest project that I've done recently, and basically we were trapped into a proprietary software vendor for physiological measurements. So it was kind of, you think of like actigraphy watches to track your movement, heart rate to EEG monitors. And what basically, after discussing with them, you had to do is fill in a form online in order to upload your data to their server. And even though I could see that it was just JSON requests being sent back and forth, they said that, we're not going to be able to allow you to have access to our API. You have to just manually put them in a literal diary view. So it's like clicking what they're doing. And I was like, there's no way I'm sitting down getting paid you can't pay me enough money to sit down and do this all day.
Yeah. And it's funny because that has been the common thread, I think, with almost everyone I've talked to of why people use AutoHotkey. Is like you come up with something and it's that attitude of like, hey, I am not going to spend my time, even if I'm getting paid, right? I don't care. It's too mundane and it's just stupid and I'm not willing to do it. So I'm going to find a way to speed it up and simplify it and whatever, right? It's that attitude. And I don't know how to best encapsulate that, right? But it's because I try to find people to teach people AutoHotkey, and most of the people I see, like you have colleagues, they have the same needs and yet they don't pick it up. Right. And I think it's that they have to have that like unwillingness to do stupid work. I don't know a better way to say it.
Yeah. So I teach a few courses as well on Python and automating and whatnot. And I start it with Michael's 20-minute rule. So I say, if you're doing the same repetitive task for longer than 20 minutes, in every case, I can guarantee it will be faster for you to learn how to automate it, even in just the short term, not even talking about cumulative long-term time saving.
Right.
And so I say hard and fast, 20 minutes. And if you don't know where to start, send me an email, go online, ask a friend.
Yeah.
And I find that is one of the few things that people actually starts to click with, because I had a mate in my office and, he was showing me a procedure where he was basically doing Dropbox, share URL, paste URL, this series of processes. Like, is this something I should automate? Like, how many times would you have to do this before you automate it? And I said, well, if it's me, I don't know, 5.
Yeah.
He couldn't believe it because he's done this 50 times.
Yeah.
But it's really trying to instill that sense of laziness. As Larry Wall, the inventor of Perl, says, be a good programmer, you have to be lazy. And sometimes, people just don't want to be lazy. And that's where I say, 20 minutes and that's it. That's where you have to ask for help.
Yeah. Well, and because again, and this is the other one I was trying to put my finger on is, you say 20 minutes. Well, it has to people even understanding the pattern of what they're doing, right, and realizing like your data entry thing, right? Like, well, each row only takes me 10 seconds to do, or it's a minute to do, and like but it's you keep doing it over and over and over, right? It's you can break almost anything down to the simple, actually, your example of the what was it, control key you said you bind to caps lock or alt? I forget which one you said.
Yeah, control and caps lock switch around.
But it's that micro, looking at stuff and realizing this is something, how many times a day do you hit that thing, right? And understanding that of the frequency as well, right? So it can be super tiny, yet when you do it a lot, it's worth the time. And I understand you're trying to give them a rule of thumb, right, to start on. But even myself, I'll realize things like, actually, I wrote one the other day that I found this. I was reading this book. It's actually funny. It's from the 90s, and the guy was just this amazing marketing genius. And in it, he was out, I think, LA, and he ran these billboards, and the billboards were just funny sayings, and he got people's attention and stuff. But in his book, he had a list of probably 100 of them. And I'm like, I'm gonna start posting these just because they're fun and interesting to Facebook and LinkedIn. Just to get people to think, right, to stop and think. And so I wrote a script I got my list. I used that OCR program I showed you where I got all the text I wanted from it, and then I dumped it into a text file. Then I wrote a really short script. I borrowed it from the forum and then tweaked it to read the whole thing and randomly grab one row, because each row was a text, a quote, and then it takes it and then it put it on the clipboard. But then I'm like, oh, you know what? I didn't even think at the time, but I updated this morning to say, when I hit my hotkey, it'll go read the file randomly, select the one, shows me a little notify at the bottom of my screen of this is the text, by the way, it's on the clipboard now. But then it also launches, Facebook and LinkedIn for me. So now all I have to do is just paste it in, and theoretically, yeah, actually, no, that's the next step. I should have thought of that, was because those 2 pages are going to be constant. The element where I paste that text and set it is a constant, right? Why am I manually doing any of this, right? I can just have it, because I'll already be, and of course I could automate the logging in too, but I could automatically, have it load and set the text and submit it for me to those 2 sites. It's all one part of the process, right? But that's another important part of scraping, which I think you talked about earlier, is you don't have to automate the entire thing at the beginning, right? You can break it up and say, well, I'm going to automate this part, and maybe next week I'll go back and say, now I'm going to automate the web scraping side of it using COM and dump it into the exact form for me. And so I just hit a button and it goes and posts those for me,
Yeah, I think that's probably a key thing that I've neglected a bit, is I tell everyone this 20-minute rule, but it is really about detecting those patterns.
Yeah.
And then knowing as well that you don't have to be able to solve every single bit of it in one automation step. You can really break it down, and that's where I guess the hackery sometimes comes in, where you work out some tweak or hack to get around some part in order to automate that. But detecting those patterns is, in my case with data entry, that's so easy. But the more and more complex the task becomes, the harder it is for people also to detect.
I agree.
It's automatable.
Yeah, but I love, because I think you're doing a great job of saying there's that balance of I want to automate this, but I still got to get my work done quickly, and hey, you know what though? And the other thing, which you did mention, but you said that's not the key driver there, is that over time, the more you do it, the more of a library and the more familiar you are. So next time something comes up, it's so much faster and easier for you to automate that thing, because you can borrow what you did before, right? And that's the non-anticipated part of it, is you don't expect that at the beginning, but when you start doing it, you realize so much of what you do, you repurpose later, you borrow from here and there.
Yeah, people seem to be really driven by the idea of short-term gains, and it's very easy for humans to dismiss the long-term. So I stick around with all my procedures because I know in the long term it pays off now. But when I'm trying to get people on board initially, my big sell is always that it's not just this long-term thing that eventually you'll save time on your work. It's
right away.
Right now.
Yeah. Actually, on that thing you're doing right now, stop what you're doing, and spend 20 minutes. Yeah. And we'll make it where now going forward. That's awesome. No, and I agree. Sadly, most people, it's what drives me nuts, is no one wants to actually improve themselves and this and that. They're not, reading books or not doing stuff to make sure they have a job and to have a better life. They just well, they think hourly, they think salary, like, oh, I want to get paid today, but they're not investing in themselves for the future. And then they wonder why they're stuck in, the same job, and don't move up. It's kind of ironic to me, but yeah.
I have to admit there is one element, which is that I can also get caught on the other end where sometimes, so for example, on that the web scraping or entry project I was talking about, I'd initially written it all in Python and using Selenium, and basically was going in, and then it got to points where you had to actually click on a calendar date picker in order to select the elements. And I was using XPath, to try and go like, which div is this? And I probably wasted a good 3-4 hours sitting there trying to work it out. And I thought, why don't I just call a sub-process to AutoHotkey that can interact with the calendar? And I was like, oh, that makes heaps of sense. And then so it's also about being able to detect, even when you're automating, sometimes it's also about being able to say, is there an easier or better way for me to do this that might not be the correct way, but it gets the job done. So there's always, I guess, as you're saying, it's a skill that's lifelong and ongoing, where you don't just become a programmer and just get good at automation and it's over. You're constantly having to monitor your behaviors and look at ways in which you can improve workflows.
By the way, you mentioned that. Did you actually? It sounds like you did. So I had it where I could, within Python, call AutoHotkey and programmatically interact with them, and vice versa. Within AutoHotkey, I could leverage using like slicing in Python, and it was really nice to be able to leverage each one within the language you're using.
Yeah. So I had that exact. So I actually, when you look at a calendar and it will have like the days of the week, and if you switch back to a previous day, the numbers are now different, and some of the numbers correspond to the previous month and some of the current month.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
So I basically, what I needed is I need to translate the days of the month into coordinates to offset your mouse movement by. And the easiest way to do that was to generate a calendar system in NumPy, and then translate a day into a coordinate, then send those coordinates to AutoHotkey, which would then go find the top left of the calendar box, and then move 52 pixels down 3 times, 52 pixels right this time, and it has no idea that it's clicking on the 17th of May. It's just clicking where it thinks it to. But there was this nice synergy between, a Python and AutoHotkey, where sometimes it is nice just to use NumPy, or sometimes it is nice to just quickly, use the power of Python, as you say, for slicing or maps and dicks. And the
multi-threading in Python is.
Yeah. And there's, learning the power of command line arguments, it's a bit of a skill, but once you really get the flow of, this is just how you handle it, this is how you wait, this is how you actually process error messages in case it didn't find the 17 on time, what do you do?
Right.
Once you get the hang of that, your entire workflows around AutoHotkey can change, because now you can start integrating it with a whole series of different programming languages.
Cool.
It was pretty similar as well with our air traffic control simulator. That was written in C++, and we wanted to have interruptions or distractions occur during it. So we just made it so that you can have you can just call the sub-process as an exe, and I can make that AutoHotkey, and now it's AutoHotkey. I can make my distraction anything I want,
Yeah, sure. Awesome.
So,
by the way, SPSS actually has a COM object, connection. You can connect with it and do like whatever you want, just like with Python, really. I mean, R is in there, but Python, I know you can do a lot of stuff with. But what was also cool, and Gabe and I did this like 15 years ago, within SPSS, I was launching executables within my syntax. So I was launching, it was the host command, if I remember correctly. You can launch other stuff from your SPSS syntax to launch other programs. And so I forget why we were doing it to get around something. I think it was after we ran something, we wanted it to say, okay, now take my output and zip it up and, write an email or something. But it was one of those, like, you can do what?
Yeah, that's incredible. I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah. It's almost like it's not a thing. I mean, you never find anything on it, but it came in handy. And I just remember it was a really long time ago that we did it, but we were playing with it and going, oh, this is actually pretty cool to be able to do it, because like, especially actually, so like I do this a lot. I write my stuff in SPSS. I do all my stuff. I export an Excel file, right, from, because everyone else in the world, like, they want Excel. But then I'm like, okay, now I have to go do something else. Well, I'm like, oh, I can write an AutoHotkey code to take that Excel file, open it, format it, freeze the headers, change colors of cells, do all this stuff for me. And I can make that part of my SPSS process. So it launches it for me, right? And it was like, oh, this is nice. I don't have to switch gears and remember to go do this now, because it's part of that process in SPSS.
Yeah, that's incredible. I love that idea of being able to even connect an SPSS, anything. And but I will say there is something very unique about AutoHotkey, perhaps just in my heart, but I think in general, where it feels like the glue that can hold anything together. So even if it's not the best tool for the job, it's probably the best tool to connect with.
To go across. I totally agree. Because I think how it connects to the Windows API and everything, that was what drove me nuts in Python. Was I found some for doing hotkeys in Python. I forget what they were called, but boy, they were not easy to use, and it was just clunky. And so that was why I'm like, well, how in Python? Because I'm like, I'll be browsing, and I'll be like, oh, I want to rip this page and do something with it. And I'm like, in Python, I'm like, how do I tell it, go grab my current browser, the URL, and do this stuff? And so I'm like, you know what? I figured out how to use AutoHotkey within Python to do that, and vice versa and stuff. But yeah, awesome. Well, thank you. Is there anything else you want to bring up?
No, I think that pretty much covers most of my experience and love for AutoHotkey, and I'm glad that we touched on the kind of dynamic interactions you can get through command line arguments and just threading together mishmash of programs, because all my developer friends that are working in big software industry think I'm crazy, but yeah, it really when you're working in data science, sometimes you just have to do what's required to achieve the goal. And yes, I'm glad we got to cover some of those funky interactions that can occur when you mix and blend up different languages.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to, this is where it confuses a lot of true professional programmers, is when we say automate something, you don't have to automate the entire thing soup to nuts, right? And like, sometimes it's just not worth the effort, because you just need to get something done, and it's something that's you're going to use it this week, and then next week it's gone, right? And so I'm like, I'll automate up to here and then stop and do some human interaction real quickly, and then hit my message box, which would pause the script, and then let it continue on. And that's something I think most programmers are like, oh, that's wrong. You're like, it's you know what, I got it done in minutes instead of days, and it's fixed my problem and it works. I mean, what more do you want?
Yeah, I'm glad to have spoken to you and know that I'm not the only one out there engaging these practices.
Yeah, and as you, I actually, I'm also, just so you know, I'm sending you my Excel function library, which I put in here, but I'm like, I started working on that when I first started doing anything in object-oriented stuff. So some of the stuff in there, it works, but it's really poorly written, but it worked. I'm like, I don't fix stuff that works. There's some stuff in there that doesn't quite work, and I don't know which is which, unfortunately. But it does have a lot of good stuff for connecting to the Excel, setting values, or what I love is, like, you can also detect where you are. Like, if you highlight a bunch of cells in Excel, you can tell it, oh, detect what's highlighted, and then use those rows and only process those rows or whatever. There's a lot of things, and I have stuff in formatting, because people that want my stuff, they want it freeze the headers and make them bold and change the shading and stuff. So a lot of little things like that are in that, and so that's there. But
yeah, thanks, Abe.
Yeah, and then
I've also got all my to some of the scripts that I talk about today, most of them should be on my GitHub as well.
Oh, cool.
Factors.
Awesome.
So all my things I showed, I can make sure they're up there, and the
That'd be
meta
awesome.
AutoHotkey makers. So I'll make sure I put them up, and for anyone else that is interested out there.
Yeah, thank you. That's awesome. Yeah, I think it you know, it helps. The more people see, it's seeing the code is great, right? But it's more just talking through like how you do stuff, because that little bit of the data entry thing, Jackie and I talked about it the other day, but we talked about it, and I think when you actually visually see it, it's easier to understand really what we're trying to explain, and get the value of like how much faster, as silly as it is, right, with your entering of the number and saying I don't want to have to hit tab to go to the next one. Well, when you're doing it a lot, right, it's super helpful. And if you had wanted to, you could have, maybe you did, you could build in an error check to say, hey, if a letter's in there, right, when I hit submit, to have it say, wait a minute, something's messed up, right? So before it would actually dump it, it'll do some proofing for you to make sure like you said, your data's clean. It's awesome.
Yeah, I would have loved to have a bit more error checking.
Yeah, I think everyone always says that. I think you said, yeah, if you play with regular expressions, yeah, oh, that's right. We were talking about the Adobe looking at text inside it and being able to manipulate it. But yeah, that's a whole nother. I'm glad you've worked with them. A lot of people haven't even touched them, and they can be incredibly helpful and fun, and also make you want to bash your head against a wall at times. But
yeah. And I think you described it perfectly in one of a previous video of yours where you said you leave it for a month and it somehow has just left your brain.
It's gone. It's just gone. Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. Like, and what's amazing is like when you're in that moment, you're like, oh, I got this, right? Like it totally I get it. And then you take a break and you come back and you're like, what? I look at stuff I wrote. I'm like, I don't even like, it's like, who did this? And I'm like, oh, I did this. Wow, I'm smart, because I can't remember it at all. I'm like, wow.
There's a few regexes and a few Perl calls I've got sitting in a few of my libraries where I actually don't know why they work anymore, but I know that they find what they're looking for. I couldn't tell you why. Yeah.
Cool. Well, awesome. It was great talking to you. Thanks you for sharing. And if you get stuck on stuff, that's what I tell everyone's like, try it a little bit yourself, but feel free to ping me, and especially like when you start a new concept, like we were talking with the Adobe thing, right? Say, hey, have you ever automated anything with this? Because even if I haven't, I might know someone who has, and I'm happy to. It just can save so much time, right? So,
yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity for the chat.
You bet. Awesome. All right, take care. Oh, by the way, you're in Australia, right? So I don't think we actually mentioned that at the beginning. People probably picked up in your accent. But
yeah, from Perth, West Australia. So yeah,
cool. All right, man. All right, take care.
Thank you. Bye. See you soon.